My name is Mary Toller, and I direct Kansas Campus Compact, part of a national movement to promote civic responsibility in our colleges and universities. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to thank Wade Redina, owner of Blue Stem Bistro and Redina's Coffee House and Bakery, and Wayne Martin and People's Grocery for their generosity and support of this event. I'd also like to acknowledge members of the Lou Douglas Lecture Committee and Olivia Collins in particular for her gracious stewardship of this enterprise. Two brief announcements. There will be a book signing immediately following the question and answer period in Forum Hall in the foyer. And for those planning to attend the Confessions of a Recruiting Director program at 8 o'clock tonight in the Union Ballroom, or for anyone who may have other engagements directly following, please plan to stay for the entire lecture and the Q&A. It is but a short walk up the stairs to the ballroom, and we'll have you out in good time for that event. If you must leave early, please do so quietly. To jolt our conventional wisdom this evening, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeffrey Hollender, President and Corporate Responsibility Officer of Seventh Generation, the leading brand of natural household products in the U.S. You have a copy of his bio in your program, an impressive read, as are his best-selling books on how to make the world a better place and what matters most. What matters most to me is that today, when the business world is making headlines for egregious lapses in ethical conduct, we have a voice, and a compelling one, speaking out for trust, authenticity, responsibility, transparency, service, and dignity. A voice that recognizes the tension between profit motive and environmental sustainability as a creative and dynamic tension, one that can foster positive social and environmental change. We are here tonight to hear his voice, not mine, so I'm happy now to introduce Jeffrey Hollender.
Can you hear me? Is the mic on? How about now? It's on now. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I want to start by telling a story that sort of touches upon many of the issues that I'm going to cover. And the story starts about 9 or 12 months ago. I think you may remember that there was a grocery strike in Southern California. People remember the grocery strike in Southern California? Okay. People remember why there was a grocery strike in Southern California? Well, there was a grocery strike primarily because Walmart had come into the market and was selling groceries at much cheaper prices than the grocery stores could. And one of the reasons that they could do that is because they were not offering the type of benefits that the grocery stores were, primarily health care coverage. So we sell to Albertsons, which is one of the large grocery chains, and we received an order from them shortly after the strike had started. And a gentleman named David, who works at Seventh Generation, I should probably, do people know what Seventh Generation is? No. So just really briefly, Seventh Generation is, we sell natural, non-toxic household products. Everything from bathroom tissue to laundry detergent to glass cleaner to trash bags to baby diapers and wipes. So we are in the business of selling, in some respects, very basic commodities that are designed to have a less adverse impact on the environment and to be safer for people to use. Anyway, so we sell to grocery stores and natural food stores. So we got this order from Albertsons, and a gentleman named David received the order, and David knew about the grocery strike, and his reaction was, we shouldn't and can't fill the order to Albertsons. Now, this is not typically what you want the person who receives the order from one of your biggest customers to think when he gets the order. But then again, actually, it was a success of trying to create a business where people bring the values of the business to bear on everything that they do. And I was actually quite amazed that this young man who receives orders and enters them in the computer system all day long had the presence of mind to even question what he should do when he received the order. So he walked in to the head of sales and said, "John, I don't think we should ship this order." And John was sort of aghast and said, "Well, wait a minute." And he came into my office and said, "You know, what do we do?" And we have something at Seventh Generation called the Values and Operating Principles Committee. Not something that every business has, but perhaps something that every business should have. And it's made up of a randomly selected group of employees at all levels of the company, and it exists primarily to deal with ethical dilemmas that we as a business face. And we had a 2-hour conversation about this situation in the committee, trying to decide what to do. And then David joined us at the end of the 2 hours, and I was selected to deliver David the news that everyone thought David didn't want to hear. And I said to David, I'm afraid you're not going to like the decision that we made, but we have decided that we should ship the order, and we have 2 reasons. The first reason was that having developed the business relationship with Albertsons, we never defined for them that we would stop doing business with them if they encountered a labor strike, and we felt that it was unfair to change the rules of the relationship in the middle of the relationship without any prior notice or warning to them. And I won't use the exact word that David used to me when I told him that, but you can imagine what it might have been. And David said that he really didn't accept that, because he said, you know, life doesn't work that way. If someone does something in a relationship that you hadn't anticipated them doing, even though you didn't think about it, doesn't mean you wouldn't change the way you relate to them based upon that. And I said, well, luckily we've got a second reason. The second reason was that we don't really think that that is the most constructive way for us to use our values to relate to this situation. Because by not shipping the order to Albertsons, yes, we will hurt Albertsons. And we won't necessarily support the workers, because Albertsons will make less money and arguably might be in a less advantageous position to pay them the benefits that they want to get paid. And certainly we're going to hurt our consumers, who won't be able to find our products. And we decided to do something that was a little bit unusual, which was to make the sale to Albertsons and to continue to sell to Albertsons and donate the profits from the sales to the Workers' Strike Fund to help them receive wages while they were on strike and they were not receiving wages from Albertsons. This is not what every business does in these kinds of situations. And the story, I'm going to just tell you another minute of the story, because as you might have induced, I like telling stories, so I was doing an interview with the Financial Times, and I was proud of this, so I decided I would tell them the story, and they thought it was an unusual way of conducting business, so they printed the story. Lo and behold, 3 days later, I'm about to go out to dinner with the president of Albertsons Southern California, and I'm thinking to myself, I hope he doesn't read the Financial Times, because I'm not really sure that he would feel, you know, he would appreciate our deliberation and decision. But the most wonderful thing about the story is, and I'm thinking to myself, this is either going to be a very short evening or a very long and painful evening. And it was one of these big dinners, you know, like 10 people from our company, 10 people from their company at a fancy restaurant. But anyway, I walked in, and the first thing he says to me is, gee, Jeff, I really enjoyed reading that story in the Financial Times. And I said, oh my God. And he read the story, and he said, it's an honor to do business with a company that takes its values as seriously as you do. And he went on and on for the whole evening about how impressed he was that we actually spent so much time, energy, and thought trying to do what we believed was the right thing to do. And our relationship with Albertsons subsequent to that has never been better. So anyway, I tell that story because when I talk about corporate responsibility, corporate responsibility is a challenging thing to do. And it's challenging for a couple of reasons. It's challenging because there are no fixed guidelines that tell you what to do. I often describe corporate responsibility as playing a game on a field that has no boundaries, where all the referees are using a different rule book, and at the end of the day, no one can decide who the winner and the loser is. That's often what it feels like to try to be a responsible business. And if you think about it, if this auditorium were filled with Fortune, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and I said, raise your hand if you're running a responsible business, I can promise you, every single hand in the room would go up. And I can also promise you that not all of them are what we might consider running responsible businesses. They all have their own definition. And that makes the process of being a responsible business what I call a sort of sloppy, messy process. You look, has anyone read a corporate responsibility report? I recommend looking at one or two of them, and you could probably relate to the GAP's corporate responsibility report, which is an unusually good one. But generally speaking, these corporate responsibility reports are filled with happy people with smiling faces and beautiful, clean rivers running through, mountainsides. And we know that that's just not reality. We know that that's not the way the world works. I think our corporate responsibility report this year is going to have a picture of someone with a muddy boot, walking in the rain, because that's a lot more of what it often feels like. Anyway, I'm not going to stand here and tell you stories or a night, but I do want to sort of, I guess, try to share why I think corporate responsibility is not only the right thing to do, but in fact is the best thing to do for business from a financial perspective, from a strategic perspective, and why, despite all of the terrible things that we read about business almost daily, there is a positive sea change happening within the business community. And in many respects, I would almost equate it to, if you've read the book, The Tipping Point, that we are almost at a tipping point for business to begin to behave in a fundamentally more responsible fashion. So before we do that, I want to ask just a couple of questions. Would someone be willing to sort of venture a definition of what they think corporate responsibility is? There must be a brave soul out there that's willing to do that. Yes?
Well, trying to find the balance between making profit and doing the right things. Constantly trying to find, and so trying to win. So you're trying to find, like you did, for example, a responsible way to react. And it's an art form, sort of, sounds like.
I think that's great. If you couldn't hear,
He talked about the idea of balance, the balance between making money, doing the right thing. Anyone else want to share anything else? Different thought, different perspective? Yes?
Their needs or wants within the decision-making framework, not just narrowing the stakeholder list to stockholders or stockholders' employees or stockholders' employees managers. But for example, in the communities where they have a presence, taking them into account.
Right. So again,
Here the idea is not running your business just for the benefit of your shareholders, but for the benefit of your stakeholders. And your stakeholders are your employees, are the communities that you do business in, are the people who are involved in your supply chain. Arguably, the environment is a stakeholder. Thinking about all of those stakeholders. So if I was to ask the question, do you think that business in general, behaves in a responsible way? Raise your hand if you think it does. Wow, we got 2 hands. Okay, well that tells us where we stand. Well, I'll save some of the other questions because that was a very clear message. I'm going to ask you 2 or 3 other questions. If you think about a company like Microsoft, do you think they specifically are or can be a responsible business? Raise your hand if you think they are or can be a responsible business. Did you hear that question? Raise your hand if you think they are today responsible, Microsoft. There's your answer. The can be is what gets the hands going up. McDonald's, and I'm going to skip the R. Can McDonald's ever be a responsible business? Raise your hand if you think so. Yeah. Okay. So there's hope. There's hope. So what I want to do, and in many respects, my goal is to make you feel more hopeful. And what I want to do is I want to talk about what I see as the 4 fundamental factors that are pushing business towards becoming more responsible. And the first one is that it has simply become too expensive not to be responsible. If you read in the papers just last week, a military contractor named Titan got a $28 million fine for making illegal payments and bribes to officials in West Africa. $28 million is enough to actually show up as something of significance for that company. If you think about lost shareholder value, HealthSouth, $5 billion down the drain. I mean, if you actually did a chart and you looked at the value of companies who have gotten into some type of ethical trouble, you're often looking at billions of dollars, if not multi-billions of dollars, of shareholder value lost, sometimes in a matter of minutes, if not hours and days. So it is expensive. There is a price to pay for misconduct that was not always the case. Secondly, we live in a world that's a very different world than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. According to Fortune magazine, 75% of the value of the average American company is represented by what are called intangibles. Intangibles are things like reputation, but more than anything else, brand, the value of a brand. We used to live in a world where companies owned real estate, they owned machinery, they owned inventory, they owned fixed assets. Today, the value of the average American company is in intangibles like brand and reputation. You have to protect intangibles very differently than you protect tangibles. Business is very good at making sure that the warehouse doesn't burn down, inventory doesn't get stolen. But business is just learning, in many respects, how to protect intangibles like brand. And I would argue that being a responsible business is absolutely the best way to protect those intangible assets. The third factor is the electronic world that we live in has created a greater level of transparency than was ever the case before. You can find out not just in a moment or two about a company's SEC filing, but you can, if you're good with your computer, tap into a bulletin board and read what employees are saying about the company they work for and what they are happy or unhappy about. In Europe, which is far ahead of us in this way, there's even greater transparency than there is in the United States. But I would argue that the electronic world has created a level of transparency that in and of itself is a transformative force for business. And the fourth factor that is changing the way business behaves is the business community itself. It was a fascinating editorial. I don't know if anyone ever reads The Ecologist magazine, but it's a British environmental publication, which is, I don't want to say radical, but certainly not mainstream like the Sierra and the Audubon Club. And this publication about 6 months ago was doing a editorial on global warming, and they were talking about the single greatest force on the face of the earth that is working to slow global warming. Anyone want to guess what it is? Sorry? I didn't hear. Give it to me again. That is a very, very, very close, but not on the money. He said the Bush administration, if you didn't hear. Anybody else want to venture a guess? What is, sorry. Humans. I wish, but not yet. Humans, he said. Anyone else venture a guess? Yes. In a way. What they cited was the insurance industry. Why the insurance industry? Who has the greatest to lose by global warming? The insurance industry will not survive global warming, and they know it. The insurance industry could never afford to charge enough in premiums to cover the losses that they will experience from global warming. And quite amazingly, big insurance companies like Swiss Re now interview the boards of public companies to find out what their attitudes on global warming are before they will even agree to insure the company. Insurance companies are now actually forcing businesses to do complete environmental reports to decide whether or not they're going to provide insurance to that company. And it's sort of counterintuitive, but the insurance industry, in very many ways behind the scenes, is working to educate and help businesses lessen their adverse impact. And of course, we have the financial community. Investors, I think this year will file about 800 shareholder resolutions. And those shareholder resolutions are a way to send a message to the management of the company that they're not happy about the way management is running the business. Now, for all the years that we had shareholder resolutions before 2003, the greatest percentage of shareholders that ever voted against management was about 15%. What happened in 2003? All of a sudden, case of Gillette, which is now will be part of Procter & Gamble, 80% of the Gillette shareholders voted against management on a corporate governance issue. And you had many, many companies where the majority of the shareholders were voting against management and telling management that they needed to do things differently. That's a sea change from what we had before. And that even goes further when you think about a group like CalPERS. Are people familiar with CalPERS? CalPERS is a group in California. It's a pension fund that, with its sister pension fund, has about $250 billion invested in the stock market. And they look at their investments in a very, very different way. And I'll digress to just tell one more story. Phil Angeles, who's the treasurer of CalPERS, was telling me a story about investing in the pharmaceutical industry and why he won't do it the way he did it before. And I said, why? He said, investing in the pharmaceutical company is like having someone put $10 in one pocket and take $20 out of your other pocket. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, when we calculated the cost to get a 10% return in our investment portfolio on our pensioners, what they had to pay in increased drug costs, for every dollar we made on the investment side, our pensioners were paying $2 in increased drug costs. It was a bad deal. You know, it looked good to make the 10%, but if you take a wider view of what you're doing, it doesn't make any sense. And to me, it's amazing that someone who has $250 billion to invest is taking a broad stroke look at the world that they're investing in and trying to understand how they can do the right thing as an investor and look beyond the simple returns they get in their portfolio. So there are three other drivers that are more directly aimed and almost internal to businesses that are also causing businesses to change the way they behave. And the first one, well, actually, well, if I keep asking you questions, I'll use up all my time, as much as I would love to. So the first driver is financial results. Now, it is, I think, common wisdom that if you're going to take care of all your stakeholders and be a good community citizen and do all of the right things, you're not going to make as much money as you would make if you just focused on the bottom line. Fortunately, that's not true. If you look at the research, and this research, research is, when I was, I think, like in 10th grade, I took this course called How to Lie with Statistics. There's actually a book that says How to Lie with Statistics. And basically, what they say is that you can find a way to manipulate the numbers to prove anything you want to prove. So with all things, I could find a survey that said this or a survey that said that, but if you look at all of the research, every single piece of research that has ever been done on the relationship between ethical, responsible businesses and financial performances, the majority of all of that research says that ethical companies do better over time. Maybe not in a single quarter, but do better over time. And this research was done and is reported in a wonderful book called Value Shift that is written by a woman named Lynn Sharp Payne, who is a Harvard Business School professor. But even Morgan Stanley, an unlikely place, did some research in their International World Index, where they have 602 global companies, and they rank them according to their ethical behavior, and they found that the 186 companies that were the most ethical over a 3-year period of time up through October 2003 performed 23% better than companies that did not behave as ethically. And there was even a story in yesterday's New York Times where companies were ranked according to their corporate governance, and a small 10% of the companies that were the best governed companies performed better last year in the stock market by 10% as compared to the rest of the companies. Now, this is, in a sense, a sea change. I mean, it is a very, very different notion. And the way you have to think about this is, why are they performing better? Well, in some ways it's very simplistic, because they're managing their risks better. So companies that are behaving in an ethical, responsible way are not encountering the same kinds of risks that companies who are behaving in a less ethical way. Now, those risks could be to their brand, could be their reputation, but those risks could even be, paying higher insurance rates. The second thing I want to talk about is the impact that being a responsible business has on the people that are working for that company. Categorically, what you will find is that the companies that are the most ethical have the lowest turnover rates and much lower turnover rates than companies that are less ethical. Again, if there's an ad in the paper for someone who wants to work at Enron or someone who wants to work at, Patagonia, you're going to get a higher percentage of people applying to the jobs at the companies that have the most ethical reputations. And there was another study done by Harvard, and it's just coincidental that all this research comes out of Harvard. But they actually studied that a 5% swing in retention rates could impact earnings by 25% or more, which is huge. And this sort of exists against this amazing backdrop of, there have been about 5 or 6 studies over the past 2 years about employee dissatisfaction. Employee dissatisfaction has never been higher. A Gallup study that was done last year came to the conclusion that 19% of everyone working in the United States was actively disengaged. What does that mean, actively disengaged? Well, you might guess what it means, but their definition is that those employees had a net negative impact on the business they worked for. That means they did more harm to the company than they did good. Price tag to that is about $300 billion a year. You can guess which types of companies are more likely to have actively disengaged employees than actively engaged. So again, all of these things you can put a very real price tag on. At Seventh Generation, we publish every year in our corporate responsibility report our turnover rate, because we think actually that it is one of the best measurements of how well a business is run. How many employees quit and look for other jobs every year as a percentage of the total workforce? Now, you have to compare them to peers because the fast food industry is going to be different than the high-tech industry. But we think that companies should publish these statistics. And it is a very real measurement, we think, of how well we're running our business, how well we're treating our employees, how happy and fulfilled they are at their jobs. And the truth is, it's not just about money. You can pay people a lot of money, and that does not make them happy. The third driver, and I should say, I'm sorry, because people are writing notes here. If you go to the website of the book, whatmattersmost.biz, you will find the business case for corporate responsibility, which has 20 pages of statistics, of which I'm just giving you a sampling of tonight. So if you want to see more of these numbers. And the third internal driver is the positive impact that being a responsible business has throughout your supply chain. Your supply chain, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, is, in our business, because we don't actually own the factories that make our products, which is the case for Nike, which is the case for a lot of American companies. They create products, they design them, they sell them, they market them, but they don't make them. So our products are made by factories all over Europe, Canada, in the United States. Those factories and the people that provide those factories with the raw materials they make, who print the labels for bottles, that is all part of our supply chain. And our supply chain includes people that provide legal services and insurance services, but all of those people that support our business are part of our supply chain. And I mentioned the Gap earlier. The Gap is an interesting case in point because until last year, they had never published a corporate responsibility report. Last year, they published their first report, and they amazed people because they talked about everything that was wrong in all of the factories all over the world that were making their clothing. And people said, well, why would you do that? What kind of dumb thing is that to do? Why do you want to tell everybody what's wrong with all of these factories? And I was listening to the president of the Gap answer that question. And he said, first of all, because it's the right thing to do. I want to create that kind of transparency because that's the only way I'm going to create trust amongst my consumers, amongst my employees, and amongst these factories. We have to start with transparency. And if someone's going to talk about it, it better be me rather than the press or a nonprofit organization, as is the case with Nike. You remember the long, long process that Nike went through, and most people don't know whether they ever really came out the other side of what happens when you're caught with bad conditions in the factories that make your products. So they were proactive. They went and told everybody what was wrong. And the most interesting thing that was sort of counterintuitive is he said the greatest benefit we get is in our supply chain, because by opening the curtain and letting all of these factories see who's doing well and who's not doing well, and what's possible and what's not possible, and what challenges one factory has overcome to create a better working environment, all of these factories can learn from each other. And the reality is, the better these factories treat their employees, the higher quality merchandise I get, the more cost effective these people are at running their plants, and we gain financially. The employees gain, the people running the plants gain, and we as a consumer and purchaser of their merchandise gain. And again, these are sort of not obvious things to do. You know, you sort of would assume, well, the factory that's going to treat its workers the best is going to be at a cost disadvantage to the factories that don't treat its workers as well. Now, there's certainly cases where that's true. You've got one factory that provides health insurance and another factory that doesn't provide health insurance. The factory that provides health insurance has higher costs. But that doesn't include the efficiency, the productivity, the loyalty, the commitment, how many sick days people take. I mean, there's a company called Husky that invested, I think, $30 million in creating gyms at their plants, at creating cafeterias that provide organic food, preventative health care, massage therapists, chiropractors, and people thought they were out of their minds. You know, what are they doing? Well, they calculated that they generated $500 million back in higher productivity, because people didn't want to be sick. They wanted to come to work. It was a nice place to come. They were going to get better food in the cafeteria at work than they were going to get at a local restaurant. So they changed the whole dynamic environment of the workplace. And really what I want to try to convey to you is that this thing about being a responsible business is not at odds with being a successful company. Seventh Generation has grown 25-30% a year for the last 5 years. Last year we grew 40%. This year we'll grow 40%. We have the single largest market share in every product category that we compete. We are succeeding financially. We're succeeding by all of the business metrics that business is measured by, while we continue to work harder and harder and harder at creating a better place for people to work and being a more responsible company. The idea that The Economist went on about a month ago, 16 pages of wasted dead trees, misinforming people that you can't be responsible, it's not in the best interest of shareholders, is just wrong. It's not based on the facts. It's old thinking that's no longer valid. And that is what is really so exciting. Because while not all of the CEOs that might be filling the room raising their hand saying they're responsible, are doing all the things they should do, that's for sure. Most of them are trying to come to terms with this notion that they know for the most part they probably can't escape. They're trying to figure out what the business case is for their business. They're experimenting with things that are moving in the right direction. None of them are perfect. Seventh Generation is far from perfect. But when I go to conferences and I go and talk to these large companies and I sit in rooms with other CEOs, I'm really sometimes blown away by the seriousness with which they're taking this issue. Now, sometimes the motivator might be, the 10-year-old daughter of a CEO who says, "Daddy, was that your company I read about in the newspaper the other day?" There's a lot of different motivators. Some of them are financial, but some of them are emotional. So I just want to, taking too much time. But so I'm going to take another 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to have questions. So I want to end with two things. I want to end with just talking a little bit about the internal dimension of being a responsible business, because lots of times we talk about the externalities of being responsible, being good to the environment, being good to the community. My experience is by far the hardest part of being a responsible business is creating an internal culture and value system that really lives moment to moment, day to day, and acts out those values. And I'll give you one example of some of those challenges. We do something every year called a 360-degree review. Part of that review is that all of the employees at Seventh Generation evaluate me. And they evaluate my job performance, both in terms of the business aspects of my job, but also how do I, as the head of the company, live the values that I say we subscribe to. And I publish the results of my evaluation. This is done anonymously. It's perfectly safe. People don't hesitate to be critical. And thus, I set an example by showing that, you know, it's sort of a weird thing, but in order to create improvement, you have to be open and honest about what's not working. And thus, they see me and all my imperfections, and as I never forget to say that my therapist loves these 360 reviews, because as long as I keep getting these torn apart for some of the things I don't do right, I will always be in therapy. But anyway, that's another story. That internal process and creating the metrics. We have to create the metrics around our values the same way we measure our profits, the same way we measure the reduction of our CO2 emissions. Just like we measure what our turnover rate is, how many people leave, we have to find and create metrics to measure the way we behave relative to those values. And in our corporate responsibility report, we then publish where we're doing well and where we're not doing well. And I would say of all of the things that we do, that internal development of the culture and the value system is by far the hardest part of the job. And it's even harder when you're growing at 40% because people are stressed out, they're tense, they've always got more work than they can do, and they're always asking, why are we growing so fast? Why do we need to grow so fast? It's a difficult question to answer. But anyway, the last thing I want to say before we get to questions is, you know, at the end of the day, it's all of you sitting in this room that are going to make or break this transition. And you're going to make or break it because whether you use these ideas to decide who you're going to work for, whether you use these ideas to try to change where you work, and by the way, we're not just talking about for-profit businesses, because all of these issues apply to a university, to a nonprofit, to any organization. Just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you behave in a responsible way, you know, unfortunately. So, you know, you have the power in your hands to influence the organizations you work for, to influence your friends, to influence the companies you buy from. People are amazed when I say to them that when they send letters or they write emails to the head of the company, if they're running a company that's going to be around and stay in business, is reading and paying attention to those emails and letters. In today's business environment, you cannot afford to ignore the communication that comes from your customers. Unfortunately, most people don't communicate. But it is incredibly powerful to communicate. It's incredibly powerful to vote with your wallet. Don't buy from companies that aren't doing the right thing. It's better if you also let them know with a letter or an email, but just not buying from them. I think the average person, I mean, and this may be hard to believe, the average family in its lifetime has something like $1 million cycle through the household. That's a lot of economic power that we have. And we need to use it wisely, we need to use it responsibly, and there's no shortage of ways in which we can have a positive impact. The worst possible thing that can happen is that we sit and believe that we can't make a difference. And I can tell you, I mean, I've spent my life trying to make a difference, and I've failed a lot, but I also have succeeded a lot. And I have learned that if you try and you don't give up, positive things will happen. Positive things will happen. So, you know, if nothing else, think of one thing that you can do that you've been thinking about doing, that you've been wanting to do, and when you walk out of the room, commit yourself to doing it. Because the power of all of you in this room, committed to making the world a better place, committed to helping businesses and organizations be responsible, is many, many times the impact and the power of me standing up here by myself. So thank you very much, and we'll take questions. And when we, in this question period, I don't want you to just ask me nice, polite questions. If you're thinking, man, this guy is really full of it. I mean, if you have a difficult question to ask, please, by all means, ask the difficult question. So who's got a question? Yes.
With the example and the environment that has been created by the Bush administration, how can you say that there's a big hope of change when the Clean Air Act is the Dirty Air Act, when, you know, poisoning of rivers and stuff like that is not being followed? You know, the change to benefit businesses that are not responsible. How can you look at this with such hope? I love to hear what you're saying, because I know it's true, but what I see as a reality of the regulation and direct action by government is not what gives me hope. And I have a second question. What was the seventh generation? What is the name of the company? Where did it come from?
Okay, well, that's an easier question.
The Iroquois Indians, in our every deliberation, we should consider the impact of our decisions on the next 7 generations. That's where the name comes from. So the question is, how in the world could you be hopeful in the face of a government and a regulatory environment that appears to be dismantling many of the environmental laws that have taken 10, 20, 30 years to come into place? And quite frankly, that's a disaster. It's terrible. And at the same time, there are companies like British Petroleum investing hundreds of millions of dollars to reduce their CO2 emissions, because they've found a way to reduce those CO2 emissions and improve their profitability to the tune of $600 million over the past couple of years at the same time. And when I look at the negative challenge we face, there's no question that the regulatory environment is terrible. And I must say, in the United States, there is very, very little consumer pressure on companies to do the right thing. Those, to me, are 2 disappointments. But what's amazing to me is, in the face of that, companies are still doing the right thing. Companies like Intel, who could go around the world and build plants to the lowest environmental standards of the country in which they operate, build plants only to the highest environmental standard of any country anywhere in the world. They do that voluntarily because they figured out that that's the best way to control quality. So these drivers, you know, why is McDonald's slowly changing the way they buy and sell food? You know, why does McDonald's care about how many hours a day the chickens that they kill get to run around in the sun? Why? Well, McDonald's is the single greatest positive force on making the lives of chickens better in the United States. It is. You know why? Because they're scared of PETA, and they're scared of the pressure that the animal rights groups are putting on them. They're also scared of lawsuits about people who are getting diabetes, about people who are obese. There is pressure in the marketplace that is now impacting these companies to change the way they behave. If we had a regulatory environment that was helping, the change would even be faster. But that regulatory environment is not going to stop the progress that's being made because there are fundamental economic drivers that are making it move forward. And you reminded me of one other thing that I'd like to say, because sometimes people ask me, if you could wave, I don't have a magic wand, but if you imagine that I did and I waved the magic wand, the one thing that I would change is I would make companies sell their products and services for the full cost that they have on the world. And all of a sudden, if you had to pay the full cost, that Hummer would cost a couple of $1 million. The Toyota Prius would almost be free. And organic food would cost half the price of traditional food. Because if you calculated the cost to the world of traditionally grown food, the impact on polluted water, soil erosion, the health impact on workers who have to apply those pesticides, if that company had to pay that cost, it would be too expensive to buy traditionally grown food. Anyway, that's tangential, but who has another question? Yes? You know, if you speak loudly, Rick.
I understand that worldly, diversity is becoming a huge part of a lot of businesses, and concentrating here in the United States, how are you intentional about bringing diversity to your business to continue to hit on the fact that you like to build an internal culture and an internal set of values, which I would call community, but how are you intentional about bringing diversity, or is that a direction that you're not going?
Well, we do well in some ways and not well in other ways.
Vermont is a tough place to be diverse. 99% of everybody there looks like me. Not a lot of diversity in the state of Vermont. So, if you measured us against most other companies, we would get a lousy rating from a diversity perspective. We do well when it comes to a balance between men and women, particularly well between building women into senior and management roles at the company. So the thing that we have been the most focused on is the balance of men and women in positions of responsibility and authority. But traditional diversity, we've done a lousy job. Sorry to say, but it's tough in Vermont. Another question. Yes?
How big is seventh generation, like in terms of sales, in terms of amount of employees? And also, I got the last part of that question, but are you in favor of having the government force companies to internalize all the costs so as to reflect the true cost to everything else? Like, are you good with the government to take that big of a role in the economy?
So, first question, how big are we? Well, we are a rounding error in Procter & Gamble's financial statements. We are about a $50 billion business. But we're growing at 40%, so, and we will continue to grow at 40%. So $50 billion is big enough so that I have some credibility. But for $1 billion, a lot more credibility.
50 billion in sales?
Yeah. Secondly, the question was, am I in favor of the government imposing a regulatory environment
That forces full cost accounting? Absolutely. Absolutely. That will create more change quicker than anything else, in my opinion, that could be done. And I'm not a business person who thinks that all government regulation is bad. In many cases, I think we need more government regulation.
Consumers first, or should the government first to influence companies?
It depends where we are cyclically.
Right now, it's got to come from the consumer because it's not going to come from the government. I look forward to when it comes from both the consumer and the government. Other questions? Yes.
What can consumers do about a company like Halliburton that aren't directly selling something to consumers?
That is a great question because the business-to-business market or companies that are servicing the government are not, I used to say that the things that I'm talking about apply to all business, and they don't apply to all business equally. They apply most to companies who are in the consumer products business where there's a brand involved. And as a business school professor pointed out to me, my theories don't apply very well to the pornography industry, for example. You know, Halliburton is a tough case in point, and I think that you know, that is a case where, I don't know, beyond going to your elected officials, your senators, your representatives, and let them know that you're not happy paying your tax dollars to companies that behave in the way they do. Because, you know, remember, you're funding the government's payments to companies like Halliburton. So I think you have to approach that through a political process. Which reminds me, I could, someday I would love to give a whole talk about Walmart, but I won't because we'll take another question. So I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer to that. They really need political pressure more than anything else. Yes?
The fear of softball question is a problem because the check didn't come in the mail today, so, you know, unlike some White House press corps. But related to responsibility, you mentioned environmental and, of course, dealing with employees and environment, the impact on the environment they live in. But what about the political environment with companies, and in a case in Kansas right now where there's some issues in the legislature about funding our schools, which haven't had tax increases in years. Certain private companies are putting lots of money into public relations campaigns to convince senators not to vote against any increase in funding for public schools. And I guess what would be your take about, you know, what the responsibility is, which is a softball question in itself. But, you know, what can consumers do in the case of these companies?
Well, I think the simple part of the question is seventh generation makes no political donations. We don't make political donations because if I don't want Halliburton or I don't want Procter & Gamble making political donations, I can't make them either. And I think that all, you know, beyond political donations, direct political donations, you have donations to PACs and other ways to influence the political process. I think absolute, and by the way, British Petroleum, the first large company in the world, committed to make no political donations anywhere in the world. You know, a little bit of good news. I think all politically oriented money has to be disclosed to shareholders and, for that matter, consumers. We need much greater transparency. I think that some people would hesitate buying a box of Tide if all of the political donations that Procter & Gamble was making were listed on the box. So I think that the most effective thing we can do is create transparency. It's going to be really hard to get all of business out of politics. It's going to be really hard. But transparency will at least create a way in which you as a consumer can help decide if you want to support that company, because at least you know what they're doing. And right now there isn't transparency. Yes?
From your perspective, what is a reasonable relationship between your production workers and the income earned by the CEO?
Great question. That's a good question. I think that, senior management compensation, first of all, is absolutely out of control. The rates at which senior management compensation have grown relative to minimum wage or average income is sort of sad and disgusting to look at. And I believe there should be a ratio and a cap on that relationship. I have been, I mean, it's one of those things that I'm thinking about and haven't quite committed myself to. I mean, I think the average CEO of a Fortune 100 company now makes 1,000 times what the average worker in that company makes. I'm thinking about a cap that's in the range of 10 or 15 to 1, as compared to 1,000 to 1 at a Fortune 500 company. So, and I think that the terrible untold story of all of these companies that have misbehaved, who pays the highest price? It's the people working at the company. It's the people that end up losing their jobs. It's a lot easier to move your money from one stock to another stock than it is to find another job. You look at the huge impact of pension funds wiped out because of corporate misconduct. I mean, that is one of the greatest crimes that has happened in the last 5 years. The millions of people that have had their whole life savings in pension accounts wiped out because the senior management at some company misbehaved and made a lot of money at the same time. I mean, there's another amazing thing is, how can you get a bonus based upon a profit that you then reverse because it was phony, but you get to keep the bonus? I mean, what kind of accounting is that? But that's what happens every day. CEOs get paid profit bonuses. 3 years later, the bonus is, still in their pocket, but they have to disclose the fact that the profit was never there.
And one follow-up question, you can say yes or no to this. Would your company be negatively impacted if the minimum wage was $10 an hour today?
No, because we pay a living wage to everybody that works for us. It's way higher than $10 an hour. Are you going to pull me off the stage? So she's going to pull me off the stage. And if I don't get off voluntarily, she will use some other means to get me off. But I'm happy to I guess I'm going to sign some books, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that anyone had that they didn't get to ask, either out over there where the books are or down here. So thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.